Welcome to Choose Courage Inc., where we skip the boring intros and jump straight into reimagining business and workplace experiences with We Ain't Afraid to Go There conversations. In this episode, Ash and I start to have an unfiltered and just honest dialogue about what it really takes to thrive as an entrepreneur. We explore some of the challenges of setting boundaries. How did we and how do you heal from corporate trauma and just workplace trauma that you've experienced? And how do you go about rejecting this one-size-fits-all approach to entrepreneurial success? So from redefining rest and resisting hustle culture to navigating guilt and embracing creativity, we end up going through a lot of topics that hit kind of close to home. And so we're going to challenge you to rethink about the way that you approach work, about leadership and success, all while staying true to yourself. So this isn't your average business podcast. It's a call to action for anyone ready to break the mold, set their own rules, and lead with courage and conviction. So if you're ready to reimagine your path, hit play and let's get it. Where do we want to start? Let's start with the topic of boundaries and well-being. I'm just kind of curious, just from the jump, what's some of your kind of like gut thoughts, reactions as you think about the idea of boundaries as an entrepreneur?
Boundaries is such a funny thing because, well, the first thing that I think about with boundaries is that boundaries are actually for us, they're not for other people.
Mhm.
Too often, people try to use the word boundary as a forcing mechanism for how other people behave, when it's really about what you personally withstand, what you're willing to tolerate, what you're willing to endure. And you govern your space and your time and your body based off of those things. And I feel like in conversations, especially as an entrepreneur, there's so much about this industry as an entrepreneur that we don't have a lot of weight in the game. Like we don't have a lot of push and pull. So we're susceptible to the way that other systems and people are performing around us. But that doesn't mean we have to tolerate it. And so when I think about boundaries as an entrepreneur, those are the things that really hit home is, have I organized myself, my body, my mind, my well-being around how I will respond to a lot of the cultural and systemic systems, cultural and systemic environment that are governing the entrepreneurial space. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think about too, one of the reasons why I feel like boundaries are really hard for entrepreneurs is a lot of people, when they leave corporate and then they start their own venture, they don't take the time to detox from some of the unhealthy ways of thinking, believing, and moving, and especially when it comes to boundaries. So I'll see on Instagram those reels where it says, "Oh, I left my 9 to 5 so I can work 24/7."
Mhm.
And whenever I see them, I'm like, of course, because you literally took the habits, the practices, your beliefs, your relationship with boundaries. And now you just put them in an environment with actually no kind of box and
Mhm.
boundaries to keep you like contained. And so now you're just, of course, like working all the time.
And that was probably one of the biggest things for me when I became, one, a startup founder, but then also an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for years. And so governing my time and space and having boundaries around that for me was not a huge transition from corporate because I was consistently doing that along with my corporate work. But now full time in this startup fashion, the thing that really got to me were things such as like, how do I pay myself? How do I set myself up for success and taking that time off? I love what you said about coming from corporate into this entrepreneurial space and basically just like a one-to-one transition, but then also without the boundary of I'm now running and this is my company. So I have to do everything and I have to be on the go all the time. And I think about, there was an article this morning on LinkedIn that I read talking about how startup founders, one, you have to start your venture with the mindfulness that this is a 10-year venture. You're not going to run at 100%, waking up at 6 and then busing until midnight every day for 10 years. That's just not reasonable. And so you have to transition that mindset of I'm working for an outcome that's being measured for someone else. Now I'm working for an outcome for myself and for my company and for the people that work with me. And that can be done very constructively when I have the right boundaries to pace and produce and get results. I think it really is about self-control at that point where you're just saying, just because I can work all this time because it's my own company, is that going to be the most healthy fashion for me and for my team and for the folks who work alongside of me? I just don't think it's a good example to my team to display working in a way that I would deem unhealthy for them. And so a lot of that boundary and well-being part for me is showing up the way that I would want them to show up for themselves, especially right now. It's winter. Everyone's got the sniffles. The holiday seasons are upon us. And so folks are trying to figure out how to be with their family. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think it's a unique opportunity for entrepreneurs to challenge the status quo of what does it mean to have a boundary, but also what does it mean to like rest, right? So I was kind of thinking about today around what are just some of the examples in my life where maybe like setting a boundary had a huge impact on either like my work or personal life. And I know with my main business, Humanity Centered, so I have two businesses. One is Humanity Centered, which is consulting essentially, and the other is Moonpause, which
Mhm.
is astrology for pets. And for Humanity Centered, really it was an experiment in a lot of ways of how can we push boundaries in a good way. And so one of the things that we've done is we have what I call rest and resist weeks, where it's basically like mandatory rest, and we plan it in October for the following year. And then we tell our clients, this is when you can't talk to us. So, for example, we do 1 week off in the spring, 1 week off in the fall, and then we do 3.5 consecutive weeks in the summer that we call rest month. And we rotate our whole year plan, business, initiatives, everything around those dates.
Yeah.
And that's just mandatory. We could still take other time off, but it's really this, and especially for me, I need to like self sabotage myself from self sabotaging myself because I know once I get into a groove, it's really hard for me to slow down.
Mhm.
And so being able to have that boundary, communicate it, model it for our clients has also been a huge deal. And it has allowed us to retain a lot of our B2B clients that work with us every year.
Mhm. So I'm going to drop a couple bombs in here that you probably weren't expecting. But the first one I'm going to drop is when I first started working with you, you were a client unto our business.
Mhm.
And so I remember hearing about these breaks that y'all would take and the uproar that it would ensue in the business because people are like, well, I don't know what to do. So then they would call me or they would pull me into a meeting because if you weren't available, then I was the person they would refer to. And it was so dope though, because you really crafted out that space and it was no questions asked. It was like, sorry, we're not available during this time. And that just goes again with the corporate versus entrepreneurship, which is the boundaries have to be loud and clear, especially as the small entrepreneurs that we are. We're up against some of these larger businesses that are setting the status quo about how business runs. And for us to do something different is sometimes jarring. And so here's the other bomb that I'll talk about is to me, this is the deconstructing of the colonialized perspective of corporate, right?
Mhm.
We think about pushing and getting work done and being available at all times and yielding to the highest dollar and doing all those things. I think sometimes we think we have to do these things in order to get the greatest amount of returns. When in reality, rest is very much one, it's should be a coveted thing for us because of how much more power and energy and presence we have when we take rest. But
Mhm.
also just as a movement in the entrepreneurial space as a Black woman and saying, this is actually my time. It's my time. I'm not going to show up during these times because it's not necessary for me as a business to do that. And your business is going to have to adjust around that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love when your company does that. It's so cool.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's also a reminder of nothing that we're doing is life or death. Sometimes this level of urgency it's not necessary. It's inappropriate. I remember I had a client who they were sliding into my inbox and they were basically coming in hot. Hey, I have this task, this thing that we need to talk about, and it is a complete urgency, like urgent, and it wasn't. And now I have two options there, right? I can either lean into where my client is and meet them where they're at and just follow along, or I can even take this as an opportunity to help them get a healthier perspective of what is urgent and what is not.
Mhm.
So I emailed them back sharing, hey, some of this language that's being used, while I understand the importance, tends to give this false notion of like urgency.
Mhm.
And in reality, like there's other ways, and we have actually have a long period of time to complete this task.
Yeah.
So I think it might be helpful if we use this kind of language, or if it is an actual emergency, let's kind of shift towards this language, right? And I think a
Mhm.
lot of times, especially within the consulting space, we really struggle to correct, to encourage, to challenge our clients.
Mm.
But if I didn't do that, the rest of my engagement with that client would have
Would've
been like that. And
Yeah.
now that's going to be impacting my personal life. Now I'm going to be stressed. Now I'm going to be irritable, right? So it's
Mhm.
not only in service to them, but it's also in service to me and to have a sustainable, like an actual sustainable business.
Yeah. Which, to be completely honest, is the whole service to them because you are the business, right? As the consultant, you have to show up in a way where you are managing your emotions. You have the tact, the emotional intelligence to be able to get through the work. And a lot of this work for some people becomes urgent because their lack of understanding around it.
Mhm.
And I love how you mentioned you can either lean in to where they are and like continue down this road, or you can choose it for you can take an opportunity for education.
Mhm.
And I think that's a large part of being an entrepreneur as well, is a lot of people don't get the vision. At Counterpoint, this is something that we are regularly enduring, which is how do we educate the people who, one, there's the whole investor side, there's the business side, and then there's also the user side. How are we taking the time to educate the folks around us about the product, about our offerings, about what we're doing, so that the expectations are well maintained as we all continue to work with one another? I think this has been one of the biggest lessons for us. Um, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but on the marketing side is how we talk about it. You talked about language being a structure to use with the folks that you're working with. And when we have a product, maybe this is postrology, right? Like when you think about postrology, it's okay. We have to appropriately position our product with language so that people can appropriately use, right?
Yeah.
A lot of appropriate there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because if it's happening at the level of language, it's happening at the level of practice. And I think
Yeah. Can you say that again?
yeah, yeah. If it's happening at the level of language, then it's probably happening at the level of practice.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of companies, especially within the design industry, this is kind of where they stop though. They're like, oh, let's just change how we talk about things. But then they actually don't translate that into how is this going to impact our practice?
Hmm.
So even within internally, when we're talking as like a team about rest, about our clients, we're trying to be aware of how we're talking about rest, how even within our own strategy and initiatives, we're talking about urgency. Because I know that if I'm not careful about that, then that kind of perception as well as encouragement is going to rub off into my clients and how they think about their work.
Hmm.
But going a little bit back into boundaries, I'm curious if you can maybe share with us what are some examples of your boundaries within your work, especially as an entrepreneur? What are maybe some things that you have tested with, played with that's different from when you were in corporate? What's the tea?
So again, boundaries are more about me and what I'm willing to tolerate and what I'm willing to work with more so than anything else. And for me, especially with counterpoints, as a start, the biggest question that happens when you're a startup is, what are you building? What's the value prop? And how are you paying for it? Right? Those are the three things. And so boundaries came quick with, I'll be honest, time was not the boundary in the beginning. It was all systems go. I fell into that gap where it was about build, get the team built, get the product built, and was sacrificing a number of my boundaries of when I'm getting rest. And I have a chronic illness. So when I'm not getting rest, I get sick. And I had to get sick a couple times for me to say, okay, now I need to live my boundaries a lot better around how I'm working. So then it went back to All right, I get up at 5:30 in the morning, I do my thing, da, 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 and I go to bed 9:30 at night. I'm in bed, I'm done. And we have phone off times in our house. So when we're talking about personal boundaries and wellness, those are some of the things. But on the business end, when I'm thinking about boundaries, it's really who do I want to work with? And that again is when I think about corporate, these companies are so big, you have to find ways to interact and work alongside of a number of different individuals, verticals, programs, etc., to be able to get your work done. When you are an entrepreneur, when you're a startup founder, you get to decide. And the investment piece has been such a huge conversation for us because in the world of LinkedIn and in the world of social media around investors and VCs and startups, there's this interesting tension that's happening where people are turning away from VCs and they're saying, you know what? VCs are predatory. We don't like the 10x, 100x, build in 18 to 24 months narrative that's happening. So bootstrap. So it's almost like one or the other. And when I first started looking at investment, I made a list of about 250 VCs, private equity companies, et cetera, people who were investors. And I did my due diligence in learning everything I could about those folks because I had boundaries around who I wanted to work with and what sort of influence that they would have on the business, how they wanted to work with their startups, the evidence of that in the startups that they were working with. And just having that as a structure going into the investor conversation has completely changed the way I think about fundraising.
Mm.
Where at one point there's this fear of, oh no, VCs are predatory, blah, blah, blah. So then you start to get to know some of these companies and you realize, oh, they're mission driven as well. Oh, they have a foundation of values. They have the same objective and mission in mind for their portfolio. That's where I found the boundaries around work for the thing that I'm specifically in at this moment has been the most fortuitous, is understanding who we are as a company and building boundaries around that so that when, again, I'm addressing or approaching these programs and processes that are just standard in the industry, I have a guiding light that helps me to make the better decisions for my business.
Yo, I love that. And I don't think a lot of people, when they're thinking about working with VCs and bringing in outside capital, they truly do the work to
Mhm.
understand the fit, how this is going to impact me, not only as an entrepreneur, but even how that's going to impact me personally. I think like for me, a lot when I'm thinking about boundaries a lot, it really rests in mindsets and like mindset shifts.
Absolutely.
So I have a couple of them that really dictate how I handle boundaries. One is I don't exist for people's consumption, which is really important for me, especially within Humanity Centered. I do a lot of work around organizational trauma as well as trauma informed design. And so because of that, a lot of people don't necessarily think about the fact that it is heavy when you trauma dump on me.
Yeah.
So about every other day or so, I usually get someone in my inbox talking about something traumatic they experienced within design or within their workplace. And so there is this temptation at times to always be producing content. I think personally, I've never have submitted to that temptation, more so because I kind of hate social media. It's like a love hate, mostly hate relationship. Even with LinkedIn, if I'm posting something on LinkedIn, it is truly because it's on my mind. There's no strategy to it, which for some entrepreneurs would be like, that's terrible. But it's that's like a mental emotional health thing for me. Like I can't put myself in this position where I need to feel like I need to create for the sake of other people. I need to create for myself. That
Mhm.
is huge. And the other thing too is I've had a couple near death experiences in my early 20s. And so when you have that kind of experience or when you have even chronic illness, you look at life a little differently. You look at your
Right.
time differently. So I'm very intentional with my time, both personally and professionally. There's nothing that I hate more than someone who's like super, super late because it feels like they're not considering me.
Mhm.
So, in terms of how that informs boundaries, it informs the kind of people I work with as well. The ones that I feel are going to respect that time and respect the energy that I have. but also it allows me to walk away from things that are exhausting me and to lean more closely into the things that are energizing me. And that means there's certain clients that I won't work with. There's certain clients I've had to fire. It means that there are certain activities or engagements or initiatives that I lean into, some I lean out of. And it means also too, like my circle sometimes shifts
Mhm.
because boundaries not only apply to, yes, habits, clocking out early, what have you, vacation, but also the people who are energizing or taking that energy away from you. So I've had to, sometimes I have to reevaluate my circle and be like, is this current circle actually for me? Are they encouraging? Or am I just trauma bonding with this circle? Or do we only complain instead of contribute to solutions? So yeah, those are just some musings. They're kind of like top of my mind.
I think one of the best things about my transition into this full-time entrepreneurial startup world was that circle transformation that happened. When I
Mhm.
realized that the corporate circles that I was in, it was trauma bonding. And that is a very easy thing to fall into where are we best friends because we hate the same people? Or are we best friends because there's actual value that we are exchanging with one another and we are we're in sync with our values and the things we want. And too often I think that especially in toxic corporate circles, there is a real easy ramp into that trauma area. And you feel stuck because that's your place of employment. But once I left, I realized how much of my identity was wrapped up in the things that I hated or the things that I was finding traumatic in the workplace, etc. It was a really big wake up call. And then I realized as I leaned away from that, the people I lost along the way. But I didn't really take it as a loss. I took it as a transformation. And my therapist is always really good at saying, if you continue to honor who you are, your people will come. And so I appreciate your perspective on social media. I have found that social media has helped me to craft a better narrative about my personal consumable. So when you talked about you not being an item of consumption, when I put out content, I have intention in mind. And the intention is not about like, how are people going to take this? The intention is about what am I willing to give at this time?
Mm,
And in the early days, it was really trying to figure out what's going to be trending or what's going to go viral or what's going to, and sitting in that position of being consumed. And you recognize how inauthentic that is. And you recognize the creators who do that. And you recognize that you can't speak from that position all the time. You have to just say what's on your mind and do the things that drive and fuel you. And so on the other side of the content creation, I find it a very freeing event because I'm finally able to say the things that I wasn't able to say in certain corporate spaces as I'm moving into this entrepreneurial space and really crafting out who I want as an audience, who I want as a circle, and what we can formulate as our foundational values.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's making me curious. I would love to, if you're okay speaking on it, just hear from you a little bit on how do you manage guilt? Because guilt, well, guilt's inevitable when you're thinking about your relationship with care at times. So I'm curious about like how do you manage guilt when prioritizing your mental, physical, or even like spiritual health over work or external expectations?
I used to, as a recovering people pleaser, it was heavy on the guilt, right? I felt like I was the only person who could do the thing, to be present for the thing. I had to be the support for whoever had the need. And this was really about healing.
Mm,
It was really about healing the where is this coming from? Like, where in my body, where in my history is this coming from? And why do I feel like I'm the person? And the guilt was in thinking selfishly that I was the only person that could be present for that conversation or fix that thing or
mm,
support that person. You know, there were a number of things that because of my upbringing and consistently being the blame or the fixer, whatever it was, I felt that responsibility in my corporate and in my working life as I got older. And then I started to realize, one, these things aren't serving me at all. Because when we talk about boundaries, I was letting people consume me. I was becoming the person that was the crutch. I was making it possible for other people not to grow because it was a lot easier for me to do the thing instead of allow them the opportunity to really move into the space that they needed and function and into the behaviors that they needed to be better partners, better employees, better leaders. And when you start to get into that healing cycle, they drop like dominoes, right? Like each of those people pleasing mechanisms that you've used get really loud and they get really painful and you feel a ton of guilt. And then you restructure your mindset around it and then you test it out and you see that the test is actually working. And the second part of that guilt is the way people respond to those boundaries, or you no longer doing that thing. But then you realize my husband always laughs at me because I'm like, that sounds like a you problem. And I'll say that to him all the time. That sounds like a you problem because it is. And I'm really good at placing the items where they need to go. If this is your bag, it's yours. I'm not going to be the person to carry that. And that's where I'm selfish now, is the boundaries around it. The guilt is more of an indicator to me that there's something I need to work through, that's something that's yearning or pulling from my historical past or from my psyche that wants me to do a thing that deep in my soul, I know I'm not supposed to, or I don't want to, but I know I'm capable and it would do a service for someone.
Mhm.
So it's more of an interrogation point, and that's how I handle it now is I interrogate, why do I feel guilty about this? And then I know this is getting long-winded, but then I go through this exercise of naming 5 things right off the bat that can be the alternative. So if I'm feeling guilty because I can't take somebody to the store, I hear the guilt, like, why am I guilty? I've got all these things to do. Then I run through 5 things in my head of what would be the alternative? What are other ways that they can solve this problem? What are other ways that are not being pursued? And if I'm able to come up with those really quick, then the guilt kind of relieves and then I provide solution. Hey, I can't run you to the store. Sorry so much. But perhaps you can catch an Uber. I can send a car for you if it's my nephew, right? Or there are solutions there to ease the guilt.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. No, I
That
appreciate
was a heavy one. How are you sitting with guilt these days?
when I say with guilt, I feel like I've had to reframe guilt as like a signal and
Hmm.
not a sentence. So for me, like guilt often arises from these like deeper up, childhood upbringings around values, around what productivity is, what does it mean to care for others. Some context for me, my mom is half Jamaican, half Korean, grew up overseas and came to the States when she was young from Korea. And so I get the best of both worlds of being raised by a Black mom, but also being raised by an Asian immigrant parent. So for some of y'all listening, you know what it is. But with that also comes, I think, the need to work through how I am relating to productivity. What does it mean to care for other people, especially being the oldest and often being in some ways the caretaker, not only within my family and growing up, but also among my friends and my community. So I've had to reevaluate and put some of those in check and really remind myself that truly like prioritizing my mental, my physical, and my spiritual health is how I show up fully for work and for the people I care about. Now, and when I'm talking about spiritual health, I am probably leaning a little bit more on definitions like spirituality are the things that ground you and give you meaning and purpose. And we notice a lot of people, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, having this moment of crisis around their, what I'll say, spiritual health. What is meaningful to me? Why am I doing this? Why does this matter? And so I do tend to take a more holistic approach as I'm thinking about like my health. And that's why I include spiritual health in this. So with that, I have to recognize that rest and care are not indulgences, right? But they're essentially acts of trust in my long-term vision, in my body, and in my spirit. And that subtle shift into this is an act of trust
Well, that
has been like really important to me. And so within that, I know I also have to actively differentiate what I call the difference between fences and boundaries.
mm,
Because for me, like guilt often wants to build fences. And when I'm thinking about fences, fences are made out of precaution, not understanding. I think about how fences are often made out of knowing the consequence, but not the purpose. They're reactive, whereas boundaries are proactive. Fences often focus on relationships with others, whereas boundaries focus on relationship with myself.
mm,
So if I'm thinking about an example within the context of the job search, a fence would be me saying, I won't apply to these kinds of companies because of the horrible experience at A, B, and C. Whereas a boundary is if I apply to these companies, here are the boundaries that I will implement in order to one, two, and three.
Yep.
Or an example in the workplace might look like for a fence, if I'm saying I will work for an additional few hours each day so that they can see I'm being productive, and that will decrease the likelihood of them firing me. Whereas a boundary would look more like I do my best work during these times of the day and will log off at whatever time because rest allows me to do my best work.
mhm,
And so when guilt creeps in, I often see it as an opportunity to strengthen my boundaries.
Yeah.
Again, it's a signal. It's a chance for me to ask myself, what is guilt? What is this guilt trying to protect? So if I'm feeling like my guilt is trying to protect my well being, then I need to switch and focus on what I need to honor within my well being. If my guilt is holding me back or it's pushing me towards self sacrifice or self neglect, then I need to choose to let it go. And so
mhm.
over time, I've had to learn that guilt dissipates when I act in alignment with my values. And one of my core values is living in a way that allows me to really flourish and not just survive and kind of take my way through life.
Can we wrap? That was like the perfect. I love this concept of fences and boundaries, right? It's so profound in understanding where the feeling is anchored and then how we can digest and then produce from that moment. And either honoring ourselves with the rest or with the time or with the boundary that helps to support us pulling away from that guilt in a healthy way that does honor us in our, physical, spiritual presence. Or if it's something about needing to let it go, the let it go part, I don't think folks get enough credit for the things they let go. But also, I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for the things that we let go. Because some things that are so big to us, I remember when I was young, I grew up in a very religious household. And there was always this story about pearls. You'll hear me tell it a lot, where in the spiritual sense, I'm more of a spiritualist these days, but back in my religious times, we would talk about pearls. And it was a little girl that had pearls, and they were fake ones that she got from a doll kit. And her dad would ask her for the pearls every day and say, "Hey, can I have your pearls?" And, yada, yada, yada. We can all know, guess where the metaphor is going. But one day she finally came to her dad and was like, "Here, you can have my pearls. I know that you've wanted them for a long time," and gives him her fake pearls. And then he surprises her with real pearls. And that action, though, of letting that go, because we've put so much energy and we've put so much love, feeling, thought, time into some of our habits, into some of our opportunities, into some of the things that define us at that moment, the letting go can really feel like losing yourself. And then the process thereafter is mourning. And there's so much about that letting go of saying, I'm letting go of such a huge part of me, knowing full well it doesn't serve us anymore.
Mm.
But the trust that it takes for us to do that and the event of doing it, and then really, I always say, don't trip over the things behind you.
Mm.
We have to give ourselves credit when we let stuff go, because too often it can get systematic where we're just doing it because we know, oh yeah, I've got to And I did this a lot, especially my earlier entrepreneurial days when I was running away from the corporate experience. I was running away from the corporate experience, chasing something. I was chasing independence. I was chasing freedom. I was chasing an environment where I could breathe. And at some point in time, I stopped and realized I'm actually not doing much for myself. And I've gotten to this point where I'm just throwing things out the window, being very flippant at what I feel no longer serves me because it's actually just going against the corporate experience. When there was very valuable things that I learned and gained there,
Sure.
being mindful and thoughtful about what I was getting rid of. And then
Mhm.
with the morning process of saying not everything has to go, but the bad stuff that can leave, the good stuff can stay. And that's more of a tangent on the end there, but
No, I'm tracking. And I think, I mean, when I'm hearing you speak, it reminds me about the cost of like healing and growth, right? And a lot of people, instead of choosing to grow, are just choosing to grow old. And part of that is it's painful to heal and it's painful to grow. And sometimes the familiarity, even if it is uncomfortable, feels more endurable than the unknown pain that might be following, right?
definitely.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you're talking about letting go, it actually brought me back to in February of 2023 was the hardest month of my life. 2023 in general was just a true dark night of the soul for me. It was in my like deepest depression I've ever been in. It was really painful. And I remember in February, I was talking to a friend, and there were a lot of things that were happening. You know, the tech industry was burning, and there were just these massive layoffs, which was also impacting our clients at Humanity Centered and delays in contracts and things like that. But there was a lot of other like things that were happening in my personal life, including needing to make a really hard decision to let go of someone that I really loved and cared about. So I was talking to a friend, and I was just feel like I'm losing everything.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you've had those moments where you're like, I feel like I'm losing everything. You don't really understand in full why, but you're just like, a lot of things are just slipping through my hands. I can't even do anything about it. And she told me, she said, I want you to reframe and think about this as a liquidation sale in some ways.
Mhm.
Is it may be hard to see right now, but there are a lot of things that are being pulled, taken away, so we can make room for the new, for the better. And it's so hard to let those things go and to be open about what those new things are. But she was right. And, I could see now I can see and I can understand the room that it made in order for me to have a healthy relationship with myself, my value, my worth. It created more space and intentionality with the kinds of clients I'd work with in the future. It allowed me to honestly create space to like grieve. And I needed a healthier relationship with grief in light of the things that were coming down the pipeline, right? But also, I saw the new people that were being brought into my life. I was seeing all the new opportunity that there is now emotional space for, energy for. But I said that to say, especially for folks who are in that season or have been in that season, what might it look like to kind of re-envision this as a moment where there are things that we need to let go in order to make space for the new. Because
Mhm.
I had a friend I was talking to, and I told her, I was like, listen, there's a lot of things that I'm hoping for, praying for, wanting for. And if I were to get all of that in the next week, I don't think I'd be ready. I don't have
Ability.
space
Yep.
for it.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, that's something that was just kind of coming to mind as you're talking about letting go. Like it's painful. It's very painful, but it's good. And it's also worth celebrating and like acknowledging.
And that is the point, right? What you just said at the very end, that's the point. It, we want for so much more for ourselves. And I love being a visionary in that I can see the end. I can see the end and it's so big and it's so amazing. And the experience that you had in 2023, I think we're about the same age. I'm not going to age us at all, but I think we're about the same age. And someone had mentioned, oh, you're in your Saturn return or something of that nature. And talked about there's this major cleansing season that happens every 18 years of your life and et cetera. And then it goes on for 2 years and all this other stuff. And they clocked me on it. They're just like, this is what's going on in your life. Stuff, it feels in the beginning that you were in control of the things you were giving up. And then it felt like sand, stepping on sand, where it just kept coming off. And you're like, I don't know what's going on. Everything that I'd worked for feels like it's falling. I don't have a firm foundation to stand on. I don't even see myself in the space that I was in any longer. And I had a major identity crisis at the beginning of 2023. Actually, in December of 22, I remember this was right before I started the company. I remember, oh, no, this was 23, excuse me. December 23. I can't even believe it's almost 2025.
I know. Time means nothing.
Well, it is 2025. They remember sitting in bed and I was sobbing because of all the things that I, quote, lost. And I felt like I didn't have a voice anymore. I felt like the corporate experience had really drowned out and watered down my voice on things that were very important to me that did not have space or room to be told in that corporate space within the sector that I was working in. And there's this refining process that happens when you're on executive teams where you get a language down and you have PR training and you have all of these things that really helped you to present as an ideal communicator for certain issues or certain performance or products. And coming away from that and no longer identifying one with the values that I sacrificed to do those things, but then also no longer being in that environment that supported that behavior and awarded that behavior, I was completely lost. And I sat there sobbing and eventually realized I have to get rid of all of this. All of it has to go because there's no place in the future for this. There is no place in the future for this. You have to create the space and it hurts. And the last story I'll tell on this one. I have a 2.5-year-old son. And the other day we walked my daughter to the bus stop. It's about a quarter mile. And it was raining and he was upset because his toy car was at the house. And he was really upset about having that car taken away from him so we wouldn't lose it while we were out. And as we're walking home, he wanted to run and all this other stuff. So I'm holding his hand and he decides to lie on the ground. And when my son or my kids in general decide to lie on the ground, I let them. And I know that, one, as a Black parent, that's triggering to create new patterns in parenting because my mother would not have tolerated that. But I let him lie on the ground because for me, it was a grounding exercise for him. He needed to be at a place where he felt supported and the foundation was firm for him. And he was laying there and at first he was crying and then he started giggling and then he started rolling around and then he jumped back up and he grabbed my hand and we walked away. And I think about this as adults because when we have those moments where we feel that everything is slipping and we're standing on sand and we don't have that firm foundation, sometimes we just have to lie down and let those feelings happen and mourn and really, throw the tantrum. I know it's not age appropriate for us to shout and yell the way that he does, but there's still so much to learn from children in that they recognize when the feelings become too big. They recognize when transition is happening. They recognize when something's being taken away and their behaviors are a result of those things. And I try and be attentive to that so that as I'm experiencing certain events in my life, I can figure out what is the adult process for this? Or what is the appropriate next move? Do I lay here and cry and wait until I feel supported and then I can laugh and then I can jump back up and continue on my journey? And that's typically what it looks like is you can't go over it. You have to go through it. People say that all the time. But those moments feel so big and we feel like we're losing so much of ourselves. But like you said, the liquidation is the thing. It's creating the space for us to move into this newer space with these newer people, with these newer opportunities in a way that we could not have shown up before, given what we were carrying before.
I love that. That's beautiful. And it's a reminder to not forget ourselves and to what does it look to honor ourselves in those moments of overwhelm and in those moments of transition. And it also makes me think about At least for me, I see entrepreneurship as a potential starting point and catalyst for a healing journey, if you choose it to be, right? And I think a lot of people can fall into the trap of, let me just keep pivot from one thing that was draining my life into this other thing that I hope will be less draining. But in reality, there is an opportunity to heal and heal more deeply.
Mhm.
I had someone ask me, how do I know that I've been healing from my experiences, my trauma at corporate America? And I told her, I'm noticing kind of three things. One is I'm less afraid. I don't think I realized how afraid I was
Yeah.
in corporate. And I would say a lot of people know me as someone who is bold, who's willing to speak their truth. But y'all, there's a lot of fear that I was grappling with and holding. And as the longer I've been out of corporate, the more I realize, yeah, just how like less afraid I am. And
Mhm.
so I told her, and because I'm less afraid, I'm trusting my gut more
Mhm.
because I felt like in a lot of corporate settings, I was often questioning it, or I'd bring something up or an issue and I'd be like gaslit in a certain way, or something I'd be, would be diminished in terms of what they thought was important versus what I was bringing up. So I'm trusting my gut more. And because of that, I'm less afraid. I'm trusting my gut more. And now I'm being more creative. And I think a lot of times in our workplaces, we're told, be creative, try something new, but still hope you got it if you F up. And so then a lot of us then only start to be creative in a box.
Right.
But these are for me kind of like the signals of healing, which then also impact how I'm showing up in business. I think if I can give my earlier entrepreneurial self one piece of advice or encouragement in beginning would be to trust my gut more.
Mhm.
And I would have saved a lot of money. I would have limited the time of working with certain people that I shouldn't have been working with. I would have been more experimental, more creative. And so I'm trying to be aware of these days my pivot from my trusting my gut. You know, is that getting quicker? What am I recognizing in those moments where I'm starting to kind of like question and doubt myself? And yeah, I'm just finding the more I'm intentionally aware of it, the more I push myself to practice it and actually act on my gut, the more things tend to fall in place or things tend to just be okay.
The fear piece is such a huge one. And similar to the signal you were talking about before, or similar to the signal, fear is one of those signals for me, not necessarily in the healing journey, but as an entrepreneur moving into a further entrepreneurial endeavor. When I feel afraid about something, I really have to check in and ask, is this because of the conditioning that I received in the corporate environment?
Mhm.
Largely it is. It's about how will this be perceived? What are the repercussions? Will business be taken away because me acting in my authenticity? And this is something that I've grappled with in going into the entrepreneurial space and had to work through a cycle of healing with is how do I show up authentically, honoring who I am, the purpose that I'm trying to bring into this space, the just being a voice for a number of people who don't have a presence in this space, like the voiceless, if you will. What am I afraid of? What is that signaling? And am I afraid because what I'm saying is going to be a problem, or am I afraid because of the conditioning that I'm coming from? It,
Mm.
when I think about healing, for me, there's still the measure of fear there, but it really only is present one, to see how far I've come, to be completely honest. Because the fact that I would even have the original thought and I would entertain it to the point of producing the thing and then having the reservations before releasing it into the world in whatever fashion means that I've gotten to the point where at least I'm honoring myself. And then there's still the jump. And I'm waiting for that moment where the jump is continuous. It's okay, we're running, we get to the edge, and now it's time to jump. So when you were talking about honing that gut experience and am I swifter with that? For me, that fear is really an indicator of, am I really tapping into my healed self and knowing that I've had me this whole time and now it's time to fully trust that and jump? Or is there still something for me to work with? And that's one of my measures. But also in the way that I talk about the topics that I'm healing from, I know that I am fully healed or that I am in a good state of healing with something when my ability to talk through it does not carry the emotion and the weight that I had when I was experiencing it. And again, this might be just where I am in my journey because there are some indicators of fear that come along with that. But to be able to tell the story and to be able to recall the memory or to say the thing and not have all of those feelings and moments rush back in a way that's problematic or puts me out or drains my energy, that to me is healing.
Yeah, for me, one of the indicators of healing, them in a better place, them healed, what have you, is I'm no longer trying to make sense of what happened. That's like the frustration. You're like, why? And this could be even like a personal and business. Personal, it's thinking about relationships that I've had where I just I'm just spinning and kind of spending a lot of energy trying to make sense as to why I was treated so poorly, even though I was a good friend, even though I was a good whatever. Or why did they say that? Or why did this happen in this way? And I know when I'm in a better place of healing with those relationships and those stories and those experiences when I'm not spinning on trying to make sense of it still. And same thing with corporate in terms of managers that I've had or experiences in the workplace. So but yeah, I want to lean a little bit deeper into some of the things you're talking about as it relates to entrepreneurship, especially that last note, and really under the realm of, I guess, redefining entrepreneurship in some ways. And I know you and I have had conversations about the traditional entrepreneurship blueprint. And we just love to hear your thoughts on why you feel that the traditional entrepreneurship blueprint, why doesn't it work for everyone? And I'm curious for you, like, how has it maybe missed the mark for you personally?
Yeah. So I believe I had this rant with you the other night. So I'm not in enough right. I'm going to say it again, but
It's all good.
I am wildly under the impression that regardless of what it is that we do, whether we take on the blueprint of entrepreneurship or not, it is going to be seen as unconventional. It just is because we occupy a different body. We occupy a different presence than anybody else who is the proverbial entrepreneur. And so I analogize this with luxury wear. So like the quiet versus loud luxury or the wealth whispers conversation that happens on social media. Y'all can probably tell how much I'm on luxury social because of this conversation. But I think it's so fascinating how there's this idea of quiet luxury. There's a way to be luxurious, and it is plain prints, no, like Gucci G's, no, all of these labels and logos. And those who do have those are deemed as tacky or they're deemed as loud. And I think about that in the context of wearing even what would be considered the quiet luxury. And I've been in circles where I'm wearing like a shirt from Ralph Lauren or I'm wearing a Cartier bracelet and someone says, "Is that real?" Or they challenge my appearance with it, with saying, "Oh, you've worn it in such an urban way," or "I like your styling of this." Knowing full well that I will never fit the proverbial luxury aesthetic just because of the body that I occupy.
Mm.
Same price, same items of clothing, same things will never be perceived the same. And I feel the exact same way with anything else that has this unfortunately whitewashed or blueprinted idea of how things are supposed to go. And in the entrepreneurial world, it's the same thing. Y Combinator will tell you're supposed to do startups this way. Techstars will tell you're supposed to do it this way, not realizing that Black individuals who are starting startups do not have access to the same resources, nor do they have the same attention or support from the pieces within that blueprint that they're providing. And so even after years of being inclusive in these programs, you're still seeing Black creators, Black entrepreneurs, Black startup founders underfunded, undersupported, not really making the margins that others are because of the bodies they occupy. So we really have to be realistic about doing things our way that make us feel like we're making the impact that we want to, because following the blueprint, you will always be seen as the outsider, even when you're doing things verbatim. And just do it your own way. Wear the clothes the way you want, build the company the way that you want, build with your community the way that you want. Speak to that community the way you know we speak to our communities. And that's how I feel about the blueprint.
Yeah. Plus one to all of that. And I think for me, what causes me to disregard the blueprint is I see a lot of people who have followed the blueprint and they're depressed, they're miserable, they like hate the one thing that they used to be passionate about, either on their, their marriage is suffering, whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, there has to be a better way. And I think that's where that creative spirit comes in. I think really what entrepreneurship has done is it's helped me to see myself as first and foremost a creative. And I have just had different outlets. I used to be a trauma therapist and using creativity within that realm. Then I was, a UX researcher. Then I was an innovation consultant. Now I'm entrepreneur consultant, all these things. And I think in doing that, it allows me to, I can make a note of what the blueprint is, but more times than not, I'm already thinking about how can I do it different? How can I do it better? How
Mhm.
can I do it in a way where I'm not going to lose myself, or I'm not going to be a shell of a human being, or I'm feeling like dead on the inside? So
Mhm.
I'm always curious about how to like experiment with that. And I think and we'll see, how that like levels out and shakes out over the years. But even within Humanity Centered, I've done different experiments about, okay, how can we approach rest differently?
Mhm.
So in 2024, I also included on top of our rest resist weeks or rest month, 2 months of paid sabbatical for November and December. That's a total of about 4 months of mandatory rest, not including other times we've taken off. And we still hovered around seven figures, which is pretty incredible. And we're working with clients that we actually like and enjoy and that we're not trying to like endure. And so I'm like, okay, there's a way to work with good people doing good things and making good money. And the blueprint doesn't consider a strategy for that.
Right.
So what does that mean then, even in terms of hiring, the blueprint around how do you build your team? So with astrology, which is building our first flagship product, Moonpause, an astrology for pets app, I was thinking with my team of how do we do hiring and building our team differently. So there's an example of we were hiring for this one position and we knew that we wanted to bring on multiple people. And so I told my team, let's do a reverse group interview
Mhm.
where the first round we're having 3 or 4 people interview me. And I did a couple things. One, it just gave me more compassion, understanding, right? Of when we are asking prospective hires on the spot of how to, answer these questions. Now I'm like, okay, what would it look like to actually just give people more time
Mhm.
and give those questions in advance? Because for me personally, I don't care how quick witted you are with your answer. I'm okay giving you the questions to prep for so that I know I'm getting a thorough and thoughtful answer. But the
Mhm.
other thing that did was it allowed me to see the interpersonal interactions between people. So
Mhm.
someone would maybe be talking and they'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I think I'm taking up too much space. Is there something else, anyone else wants to add to the conversation?" So now I'm learning, okay, this person is self-aware enough to know that when they're in a room, that they want to create space for other people. So lessons and learnings with that. Even in our application, we would ask questions like, outside of a bajillion rounds of interviews, which we would never, or take home projects, why? What are the other things that you hate about the interview process? And
Mhm.
so now I have a lot of data as well to understand here are the different things that we could do to be more human centered, more creative and inclusive in our approach to hiring and developing our team. And now I'm also learning about, okay, here are the things that we could do to help people feel more prepared. So even from that, we always give people the interview questions ahead of time. I always give them, here's a structure of what to understand. Here's the people that are going to be in their interview. Here's their LinkedIn. If you want to stalk on them and creep on them, that's totally fine. And in this last round of interviews for a couple positions we're hiring, we had people thank us in the application for going through the application. That's weird. That's a good. It's a good weird, but that's weird, right? I'm trying to think about when's the last time you applied to a job and you're like, wow, thank you so much. That was a great experience. Like rare, right? So, but the blueprint typically doesn't consider that. But what I've also done now is because we've created and crafted a new experience, now when we hire for more positions, we have people who are already aware of us, our vibe, our culture, our values, and I already have a list of people that I can also revisit and reinvite into the application process.
Wow. I love that so much. And you're right. A lot of people are not giving their interview process a round of applause at the end. I think I've had one interview experience where I was 100% tapped in and thankful for their thoughtfulness around the role and the experience that I was having getting into the door. Uh, the blueprint is such a funny and fascinating thing because the thing I love about both of our experiences is we've navigated our careers through a series of other creative mechanisms and vessels to get where we are right now.
Hmm.
And you asked a question earlier or kind of positioned a question around, how do we maintain that? Or how do we know that we're really like living in that entrepreneurial spirit? And I think it is about the creativity. If we are honoring the creativity, which we know is marketable, right? I'm going to be 100% honest. Everyone wants the creativity. They don't always want what comes along with it, but we can continue to trust ourselves to be creative in our processing around how we build businesses and the thoughtfulness that we appreciate personally as employees, as friends, as family, etc. And we build that into our businesses, not saying we're calling, people we work with our family, because that's a whole other conversation. But I think that one of the things me and my co-founder really took the time to do early on is we built a foundation of values. And the foundation of values were words that when I've been through a number of these exercise companies before where they go through this bank of words and they're like, yes, we're going to use empathy and we're going to use this, we're going to use this. And as my co-founder and I were talking through our values, we, one, recognized they were a reflection of how we worked with each other. I worked with my co-founder for 8 years. And we also recognized that through the process of letting go and taking on employees, the folks who work well and best with us are those who are able to demonstrate those values in ways that are uniquely creative to them.
Mm.
And that's not something you'll find in the blueprint. Instead, what you're finding is this is how you hire. Here's the job description. Go in there and find those people.
Mhm.
Or building the company itself is don't be too passionate. The number of times where passion gets stripped out of the conversation because it's emotional. You have to build the company you want to work at. You really do. And
Yeah.
the blueprint just does not support where I ever want to work again. So why would I take on the blueprint that everyone keeps saying is the success metric when the success really comes from the way we're demonstrating our creativity, but then also how we're able to show up every day with enthusiasm, even on the hard days, and get the work done, produce the product and put it out into the world that we want to see continue to make the progress that we are after.
Mm. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out with us and diving into some of these real and unfiltered conversations. We know your time is valuable, and so we don't take it for granted. If today's episode made you think, if it challenged you, or gave you something new to consider, we'd love for you to hit that follow button on whatever streaming service you're using. That way, you'll never miss an episode when we drop them. And if you want to go even deeper, sign up for our newsletter at choosecourageinc.com, and you'll get updates on new episodes, access to exclusive freebies, and first dibs on coaching opportunities and other resources to help you make bold moves in your life and business. So we appreciate you, we see you, and we're rooting for you. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort, and a friendly reminder to drink some water.